Hi, What the HealthTech listeners. I'm your host this week, Hayley Kiddy, Marketing Executive at Radar Healthcare. This is the podcast where we tackle some of the trending topics, ideas and best practice within health and social care. This week we are delighted to welcome Helen Mason. And in this episode we are going to discuss the effects on families when a loved one enters the social care system, particularly when they lose the ability to speak, and how these individuals can still participate in their personal care plan. So Helen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Hayley.
So Helen, I think probably the best place to start is maybe talking about a bit of your background and why this is such a passionate and personal subject to you. Do you want to maybe enlighten us a bit?
Yeah, so by way of background, my father, who is 89, needed to go into the healthcare system. He was independently living at home, but with carers. But he, at 6'2" in height, he was very prone to falls, unfortunately. He wasn't steady on his legs. And it became quite quickly apparent that we needed to do more to look after him, which at that point just wasn't possible at home. And so it was really useful to be able to look at the healthcare system and say, what needs does he have and how can that be supported by being in residential care, and to support him further, because we were worried as a family about his health and safety. We would be getting the calls in the night to come and help pick him off the floor, and that wasn't great for him and his dignity, nor was it great for us with full-time jobs, but also sort of having that very sort of impactful thought that we want to make sure that Dad's well looked after, he's cared for, that the change of being in the care system as opposed to living at home was good for him, because change at his age is quite dramatic. At 89 years old, to be then being moved home is quite a big deal. So we knew we had to do something, but we had to do it in the best possible way to ensure that his care and his dignity was maintained.
Yeah. And it's such a hard decision for so many people as well when they make the decision for their loved one to go into the social care system. What kind of emotional impact does it have on you and your family?
Yeah, it's difficult. You go through a range of emotions. There's the initial relief that they're going to be looked after and that you're not going to be called in the middle of the night because they've fallen and on the floor. And Dad would never break a bone, but he was always stuck on the floor until we came and got him. So there was still that urgency to want to go and help him and just keep him warm, get him off the floor, back into bed or wherever he needed to be, whether it was the chair or going to the bathroom. So that there was that sort of initial relief that we wouldn't have that anymore, but then you get this wave of guilt that just makes you feel that, oh, this isn't what he wanted particularly, and although he's warm and safe and well looked after, it's not actually what he wanted. And so you go through that guilt of feeling that you've done something that he didn't want you to initially do. And he learned to enjoy the home and his environment, and he always admitted he felt much safer there because there was the pull cord, and people would come to see him very quickly if he was having any problems. So the wave of guilt was definitely a big one. And then a sense of comfort was there too. It was quite an emotional roller coaster, really, but there was that comfort in the knowledge that he was starting to adapt well to being in the home and enjoying the residents' company and the activities that they put on. You sort of feel like it's just going to be, oh, great, this is what we've done now. But you're hit by so many different emotions. And it's because we care, isn't it? That's why we get emotional about the people that we love. It's because we care about them. But yeah, the emotional roller coaster was definitely in full force.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is like what you say, you care, and also you only want the best. So you're just trying to do everything you possibly can to ensure that their quality of life is the best that it possibly can be. So yeah, I can totally understand the emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. And I think also the fact that different members of the family go through different stages of emotion at different times. So I wasn't as ready to move Dad into a home. My sister was much more so. She's maybe the more practical one of the two of us, and I'm the more sentimental one. So we make a good team. But at the same time, we're facing lots of different emotions at different times and having to work with each other in terms of how we address them and work together to give Dad the best possible opportunity to continue to live on his life with the dignity, as I mentioned, and good quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's good that you and your sister are a good team, because I think the family support at this particular time is something that's super important for everyone to navigate through, and to lean on those that you possibly can do.
Exactly.
One of the biggest factors for you, and like so many other people, is that entering social care is often the result of like a medical condition. And in your case, that meant that your family member and your dad wasn't able to communicate in the way that he always had. So in your experience, how can social care systems better support families during this transition period?
Yeah, it was a difficult one. So Dad went into the home in June and in August had a really nasty urinary tract infection, which hospitalised him for 12 days. He came out of that like he was a semi-pro tennis player. So I always describe it. It was like he was playing Djokovic in the final at Wimbledon. He was 2 sets down and he was in the 5th set and still battling. My dad had 99 lives. He was an incredible man. And so while the UTI floored him, he lived, which was great. So he was then returned to the care home, but he was severely impacted. So he was then bedbound. He had lost quite a lot of the use of his speech just through complete weakness, basically. And so I think from a care system perspective, there again was a lot of change for him. There was a lot of change for us as a family. And I think the care system just has to acknowledge that we're not clinicians, that we don't understand all of the phrases, that we don't understand the patient pathways and the care that's given at the different points, and the different equipment that's needed, the different tools that's needed, different techniques. It's an information overload. And I think just having that talked through, and sometimes it's just with one family member, they then have to repeat that to the rest of the family. Chinese whispers, tiredness, exhaustion, misunderstanding, your mind's all over the place. You're not going to register all of that information straight away. And I think it's almost sort of taken for granted that you understand the care that they're giving and why they're giving it. And that might be the case on some elements, but there aren't on others. And I think the care system just needs to know that they're talking to the layman. How would you describe it to a child? How would you describe it to your mate down the pub? Don't just describe it in adult language sometimes. Break it down so that families can understand and pass on that information when other family members or friends of their loved one are facing this. So whether that's using verbal communication with family members, whether there's leave behinds and aids, whether there's a video you can promote that allows people to watch it in their own time, that would be really helpful in learning so much new information and language around the care system and what's right for your loved one.
Absolutely. So many amazing points there, and so many things that, you know, to touch on and stuff like that. It's important to understand as well, like not every person will have the same questions. So when you're trying to relay everything back, you know, your other family members might have different questions, and it's sometimes that barrier of getting that information, which obviously you experienced a little bit of as well.
Yeah, so, you know, I would come away, and I'm lucky that my other half is a paramedic, and he said, well, did you ask about this and did you tell them about that? And I say, I didn't even think about this or that. I just asked the questions that I thought of, and actually he needed to be in the room with me because he could have asked the pertinent medical questions that I didn't even think were a thing. So that was really telling for us, that actually just having somebody that you trust, perhaps that is medically trained or that can retain more information, might be a bit more objective, is either on a video call with you, because the care team just want to, in the homes just want to impart everything, so that they sort of brought you up to speed, not necessarily a tick box, but that they've imparted all the information and now you know it. And actually that's not the case. Sometimes it's repeat message, which being a fellow marketeer, we know to do that in marketing, but it's not necessarily always thought about by people imparting knowledge that aren't from a Marcoms background.
Yeah, absolutely. And also as well, you touched on that about is having that impartiality as well. You know, if your husband was in the room with you, they can be sort of like more objective, whereas you're going with such an emotional tie as well. It's really hard to be objective and impartial when the heart is, you know, your heart is pulling and you're just wanting them to be safe and care, you know, and everything like that. So I think that's a really important aspect as well. It's having that impartiality, if it's able to be able to lead that sort of care as well.
Yeah, exactly, and also for the people that are delivering the information, you know, I'm lucky that I'm quite patient and controlled. But if they're faced with somebody who is more erratic, more emotional, that can be difficult for them when they're trying to relay the information too. That must be really tough on them to know that they've got to say all of this, and maybe English isn't a first language, or the person isn't quite ready to listen. All they're caring about is their loved one. You know, it goes both ways, doesn't it? So just drip feeding information, doing it in a careful manner will land better with the family member as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it also comes back to the person as well. It's how they have input, like how they have an input in their care as well. Touching on the fact that your dad lost his primary communication method, which was his preferred communication method, how do you feel that the experience was in that sort of thing? How was your dad able to input into his care plan?
So we're lucky. My dad and I especially were exceptionally close, and I think anybody that's got an elderly parent or loved one, just make sure that you understand them and know them as much as you possibly can now, because it made it so much easier for me. Even though he was struggling to verbalise, I could catch a few words here and there, and knowing my dad as well as I did, I could understand what he was trying to say. So I knew, for example, he would say things like, "What I want to know is," and people would focus on all of that and then not hear the rest of it. And because I knew he'd say something like, "What I want to know is," I then knew I could ignore that bit and just go with what he needed to know was. So I can't express enough how important it was to know my dad inside out, to know what he was asking for, because then I could ask and say, "Do you want to know this, Dad?" And he would nod. And that was really helpful. And he was a fantastic storyteller. You know, people would warm to him in a room, and so for him to lose the ability to talk, he lost his personality in a lot of ways. And so a little bit like you do, what with a podcast or with radio, you don't talk at the audience, you talk with them. And I really resonated with that, with somebody telling me that years ago, that it's important to talk with people, not at them. And so I did the same with Dad. So I'd say, "Oh, Dad, we'll grab a cup of coffee, and then I'll tell you about my day, and you can tell me all about yours." And he felt part of a conversation, not just me turning up and saying, "Well, what I did at work today, Dad, was." So he felt like he was still part of a conversation and part of my life. And I would ask for his opinion on things. And while he couldn't really give me a full rundown of his opinion, I said, "What would you do, Dad? I bet you would say this. Is that right, Dad?" And he would either nod or shake his head. And if he shook his head, I'd go, "Gosh, I thought you'd have said that. That's interesting." And so it was still a conversation in its fullest part, even though it was a very different type of conversation. And yes, you know, I would leave the room and cry on a number of occasions, but I at least felt for him that I was on my best form that I possibly could be. And then going on to the care perspective, it also meant that when carers were coming into his room, or the nurse or a doctor, for example, I still had that same sense of conversation with Dad. It's like, "What they want to do, Dad, is that okay?" Because it's really important that while they're non-verbal, the non-verbal cues are just as important. We would never administer any medicine. We would never do a procedure. We would never change him and look after personal care without a nod at least from him, or a thumbs up. That was another good way of communicating with him, was thumbs up, because then he had the choice of whether he needed pain relief. He had the choice that we looked after his personal care, or shaved him, or brushed his hair, or whatever it might be. And it was really important, again, going back to that point I made about dignity, that he made every decision. That wasn't down to us.
Yeah. I think that's a crucial point, isn't it? Is that dignity, it's having that right to choose still, and such an important aspect to care, is still enabling him to have the power in his mind of what he wants to do. So it's so lovely that you've been able to do that, and keep his dignity throughout the whole of his time within the social care system. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think where we were slightly let down with the home that we were in is that the team asked me a whole load of questions that I then filled in a survey, filled in forms to say, he doesn't like a milky, sugary tea. He likes a black Earl Grey tea. The one thing I would implore to the social care system and people listening is that if you're going to ask those questions, act on them, because for the time that we were in the home, his box of Earl Grey tea was never opened, and that was a real sense of frustration. If you're going to bother to ask the questions, don't make it a tick box exercise. Do as you've been asked to do. So make the weak Earl Grey tea or whatever that person wants. What were their hobbies? Find out a bit more about that from the family and talk with them about their hobbies and their lifestyle before they came into the home. We found in the hospital that people, and it'll sound awful, but the doctors spent more time with us when they knew that my dad was a member of Wimbledon and that had served his country and played internationally. They didn't just see him as Peter, who was an elderly man in a bed. And I thought, well, gosh, how lucky is Dad that he's got us as his family around him to say he may look old and frail, but actually I've never beaten him on a tennis court in my life. And that sort of pepped them up. And I thought his care is improving because they know the person this is. And because he's non-verbal, he's not able to, nor would he show off about it, but I'm super proud, I would say it. But his care improved once they knew the type of person he was. So if there's a way to understand that and find that out from somebody that's non-verbal, through family, through friends, through their doctor or their GP, please find out more about the person, because then you're treating an individual. You're not just treating patient in bed 5 or whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And everyone has so many amazing stories in their life. I would love to know more about the Wimbledon story. But yeah, it's so much, isn't it? You've lived a whole life. Like, there's so many amazing things that you can talk about and say and everything like that, and that builds and shapes them as a person. So it really should shape their care as well and what they would want, because it would give you such an insight into what they would want.
Exactly. And a lot of elderly people sort of don't want to burden anybody, so they won't say when they're in pain, they won't say when they need help, or because they want to be fiercely independent. But actually there's a way of building a rapport with somebody, even if it's non-verbal, that they then will feel, I can talk to that carer or that activities lady or the nurse or whoever it might be, because I've built a rapport. I can ask for more pain relief. I can ask for help getting my jug of water poured or whatever it might be. They don't want to burden anybody if they don't have a good relationship with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the difference. So it's sort of like generational as well. The elderly generation as it is now, I think I can speak from personal experience, like my grandparents are exactly the same. They've recently been in hospital, and it's, oh no, I don't want to trouble them, oh no, they're busy enough, oh they'll come round. And I'm just like, no, sometimes you've got to put your hand up and say, it's my turn, come please, I need some help. I think
exactly, which is, it's a lovely quality to have in a lot of ways, but it's frustrating in others, because you think, no, you deserve the care. You've worked hard, you've paid your national insurance and your taxes, and this NHS is here for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if then in the future, maybe our generation is maybe a bit more, I don't know, upfront, maybe. Maybe it might slightly start to change. Maybe we're not ones to sit back and just accept it. So I wonder if that is potentially a shift going forward, and whether we might start to see that a bit more.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yes, I'm just thinking back to times when I've been in hospital myself, and I pressed the button if I needed help. So I think you're right.
Me too. I was sitting there quietly. Gosh, I wonder what that says about me and you, Helen.
Exactly.
I suppose it's an issue that we're going to be tackling for many years. What role do caregivers play in facilitating communication? So for between non-verbal individuals and social care, and how do you think this could be developed?
It's a really good question, and one I've been thinking about in terms of sort of what more can be done, or what can people do to help. I think, to be honest, it is going back to that point about rapport, and whether that's the rapport with the person or whether that's rapport with the family member that can then talk on their behalf or can explain the person and who they are. I think that's the first port of call. But also just, and this is a difficult one, it's about spending time with that person. Everybody in social care that I know is passionate, but they're so busy. And it's difficult to find the time just to sit with the person, work out potentially even what programs they like to watch on the television or via the radio, because that gives you a bit of an insight into who they are. Often you're asked to bring in items to make up a memory wall on an individual's door. And again, that can be some triggers. Like, oh, I see that you've got a playing card. Did you used to play cards? Or there's a tennis ball. Could you tell me a bit about that? And just even if it's not through verbal communication, but they can bring something up on their iPad or on a phone or with a book that they've got next to them, it just gives an idea of who that person is, to then understand them that little bit more and to develop the rapport that we talked about, to develop care.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree completely. I think the social care and, carers do an amazing job, and they are so stretched. So imagine if you could free up some more of the admin and the laborious tasks that they have to do, and devote more time to care. I think we've touched on it briefly at Radar Healthcare in the past, but it's not just a catchy phrase. It can make such a difference. And I suppose in your case,
and it's difficult. There's no kind of one size. Yeah, sorry. And there's no one size fits all, is there? Because people that have got non-verbal communication might be very good at doing technology so that they can write it on their phone, or they can put it onto a screen, or they can draw, whatever it might be. But there are others who lose their dexterity and haven't even got the ability to point or support. That must be so difficult to work with. But there are still ways, if you try hard enough, whether it's through encouraging volunteers to support and sit with patients and learn about them. It's been fascinating doing pets in hospital. My dog and I go to the QE hospital in Birmingham and go to the wards, and you learn more about somebody with how they interact with a little furry French bulldog, and sort of what makes them giggle and makes them tick, than you might do with just how are you? Because we'll always reply, oh yeah, I'm fine, even if you're in a hospital bed. Yeah, fine, thanks, how are you? It's just a British polite way of being, whereas if there's something that's a bit of an icebreaker, perhaps that's ways of finding out a bit more about the person through non-verbal cues.
Yeah, absolutely. And when there is a dog there, if you are a dog person, absolutely, why wouldn't you want to stop and stroke it and do it? And it just creates that kind of bond a bit as well. So you're almost like the pressure's taken off about how you actually feel, and you can just be a bit more about yourself. And that's probably when the conversation can sometimes start flowing.
Yeah, exactly. And if people aren't dog people, they're quite happy to watch. I've noticed that, interacting with somebody in another bay, in another bed. And if it just brightens their day or gives them something different to look at than the four walls, then great. And actually, when we were in the care home, I went to quickly visit Dad. I was only taking him in some new clothes, and there were 2 llamas in the garden. So Dad and I went and talked to the llamas, and it was a very bizarre and surreal experience, but great fun.
Absolutely, I can imagine. Yeah, definitely something to perk up your afternoon, isn't it, seeing a llama?
Exactly.
Yeah, they do. We've seen at the care show often as well, like they have like the touch therapy, so they have like Shetland ponies, little guinea pigs, and they say they go into a lot of care homes and stuff, and I just think, oh, that would just brighten up your afternoon. And it's all about the different resources, the different touch points, the different activities, and it just does help create that sort of care around that person.
Yes, and also makes them feel included, that it's accessible, having something to hold and to touch, as opposed to feeling like the only way to communicate is through words, but actually a shared experience through holding a small creature or petting an animal, I think has fantastic therapeutic qualities and makes everybody feel like they're on an even playing field, as opposed to being left out because they can't answer a question perhaps, and therefore might be ignored because people are unsure of how to communicate with them in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose going through this, you obviously have recently lived this experience. What kind of piece of advice would you give anyone that can help non-verbal individuals express their needs?
As a family member, I would certainly express the point that's ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask what you think might be a really basic question, or ask the same question over and over again until it makes sense to you and people feel like they've got a handle on what it is. And things change when they become non-verbal. For us, in our experience, it was because he was fragile and frail, and at the end of life, and was in palliative care for a number of weeks. And so for us, it was about asking the questions and asking them again, just to sort of make sure that we understood them. I think for the care system, just don't assume that when you've answered a question that the person really gets it. They might still just need some support and some help. And so just being kind, giving us the time that it takes just to learn about the processes, the systems. Also, we weren't informed, but we're going through it now about continuous healthcare funding, CHC funding. So we are still able to apply for that to support Dad's care once he was released from hospital. I should say discharged from hospital, not released, but discharged from hospital, because understandably, there's only a small pocket of money. There's the NHS is what it is at the moment, but there is the ability to ask for funding, even if you don't think you're eligible. Just ask those questions as well. And carers are very good at saying whether you are eligible or not, and sort of start the ball rolling. So asking about funding just to support you and your loved one in that time is really imperative too.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. Yeah, definitely. There's areas, isn't there, that like the emotional roller coaster, but there's also like a bureaucracy roller coaster as well, I suppose, to deal with and everything like that. You might not necessarily be aware that you get funding for different elements of the care, but yeah, it definitely would lighten the load as well for everyone, that, especially the family as well.
Yeah, because there's a lot of costs involved, whether it's the care and you're increasing the care. For us, Dad's care went from sort of level 1 independent living to level 2, which was bedbound living, and we weren't aware of the cost increase. We knew there would be one, it's obvious, but we didn't know what that was until we got the first invoice. And I think it's the assumption that there's funding there, and we just had to really think about how we were going to afford this. And then for us, as Dad declined further, realising that he wouldn't have his falls, we actually then brought him home for the last few weeks. And that has a lot of bureaucracy around it as well to get your head around. So I think the other thing for families then in that sense is be forgiving of yourself. Don't beat yourself up if you're having to do things quickly or slowly. Do it at your pace to suit you and your loved one. Don't be rushed by social care systems. And for social carers listening, just be patient, because this is often brand new to people and what they're going through, and they're trying to hold down full-time jobs, look after families. It's often the sandwich generation is what we are when you've got a young family and elderly parents or grandparents, and you're trying to do it all. And just bear with us while we go through this and find our way.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Helen. It's definitely you're almost being pulled in so many different ways, and there's so much to learn as well from doing this for a first time, because there's no handbook on what to say, because like you say, everyone is different, no one size fits all. So it's almost like you're trying to do it from your heart, and then you've got to try to figure it all out as well. So I can imagine. Have you got any other bits of advice? Where did you turn to kind of scope it all out, and how did you navigate it?
So I am a very organised person in my work life, and sort of looked at this as almost like project management. So I gave my sister tasks. She would look at the funding. I looked after the equipment with the occupational therapy team. And then we would both look after Dad in various different ways. So breaking it down, don't take on the load yourself. Ask for help from family members, not just thinking just because you're the next of kin that it's just down to you. Make sure that it's manageable for you and for everybody else as well, because sometimes people don't know how to help unless you tell them exactly what you need. They want to help, but they don't know how. So by just saying to my sister, right, if you could just handle the funding, I'll handle the GP and the occupational therapy and a couple of other things too. And it makes it much more simple and bite-sized. And then you have a little bit of a sense of achievement that you've worked well together to achieve the right level of care for your loved one. That's definitely a key, just teamwork for sure.
Oh, I love that bit. Yeah, teamwork. Yeah, it's definitely yeah, absolutely what you say. You can't do it all yourself, can you? And I think that's the important thing as well. A lot of people want to help, they just don't necessarily know how to. So I suppose your approach and dividing up tasks and making everyone aware of what they kind of would need to do in order to be the biggest help is probably one that is probably quite successful, because then everyone knows what to do, and no one's kind of getting offended, or, you know, it's not kind of treading on anyone's toes, and it's very clear.
Yeah, exactly, because emotions do run high when there's a loved one in care, and we had our own challenges. It wasn't a smooth ride for us as well, but if you just have it in mind that you're all working towards one common goal to support that person that you love, then you can't go wrong, definitely.
Absolutely, definitely not. And I think that would resonate with so many people, because everyone has loved ones and they just want to do their best.
Yeah, and you know, we all are going to be old. Well, hopefully we'll all get old at some point, and we'd expect the same level of care for us. So this is like the dry run of sort of teaching for me, my nephews and my stepchildren. This is how I would like to be cared for when the time comes. So it's about the whole family learning of the process, so that it pays forward, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way of thinking about that. Has it made you think of anything that you from your experience, you know, recent experiences, has it made you kind of think, this is what I want, this is what I wouldn't want?
Yeah, it certainly has. And I think, again, while I'm verbal, and hopefully I won't become non-verbal, but if that ever happened, at least my loved one, my family, know what I would want in the future. There's you know, that sort of trepidation of, I don't know what they want, I don't know how they would like to be cared for. Luckily, we had a very open dialogue with my dad, and I was able to understand exactly what he did want from a very early age, because it just meant that, and then it informed me when he was non-verbal of how best to approach it. And so having these conversations now, it's like talking about death, about your will. You know, it's not pleasant conversations to start, but they're really important ones to have, because it makes the whole process that much easier when the time comes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to have those sorts of conversations as well. They might not always be the easiest, like you say, but for you to understand what to do in later years, I definitely think it's interesting to ask, and, you know, we tend to talk about a lot of things, so why not add that one into the mix as well?
Yeah, definitely.
So I suppose we're kind of coming to the end of the podcast now, and at the end of every episode we like to ask our guests what the HealthTech moment is, and at this point we've literally just heard about every story you can possibly think of. So Helen, what is your what the HealthTech moment?
For me, I got married 4 days before my dad passed away, and my what the hell tech moment is the time when I went to see my dad after we'd got married at the register office and before we went out for a meal, and it was the most precious moment I could possibly ask for. He hardly could open his eyes, but he knew I was there. He smelt the bouquet that I was carrying, and he had a conversation with my husband, and it was the most precious and special moment, and I will remember that forever.
Oh, Helen, you got me welling up, honestly. Literally, that just touched me. I was like, oh gosh, sorry. Yeah, definitely. Honestly, I can just imagine what it was like, and for you especially, to know that, and such an amazing family bond that, you know, that you managed to be able to do it in time, and your dad was there, and I suppose it's like the smelling of the flowers as well. It's like that other element. It's not just, we haven't just got one sense of being able to talk. It's like, it's everything else. So bringing that in.
Yeah, definitely, and it was just very special, and what a moment to treasure. I wouldn't have it any other way. So I'll dedicate this to my wonderful father, Peter, who sadly passed away in November.
Oh, Helen. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing so much, for being so open, so transparent, and so vulnerable as well. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Hayley. And also to say thank you for raising this subject. It's so important that people, either the families or social care, acknowledge the role of the family and the importance that they play. It seems so simple to say it, but actually sometimes some of the basics can be forgotten. And if they're not forgotten, then I congratulate you, because for those that get it right, you make all the difference in your loved one's final moments. And that is really appreciated. Absolutely. And the team are coming to the funeral. They were part of our family at the end, and that was because they gave such wonderful care and they understood what we were all going through, not just Dad, but all of us. So.
Absolutely, and it's that family impact, isn't it? It's on everybody, and to hear that, you know, you've had such a lovely experience as well, it is good, and it's one of the hardest jobs in the world, I think, being a carer, being part of a social care system, but it's so rewarding, and to make that lasting impact on that person and the family is truly remarkable.
It sure is. It sure is. There's some wonderful people out there that do it, and I commend every single one of them.
So thank you very much for joining us, Helen. Thank you to everyone for listening, and join us next time for another episode. If you do have any questions, don't forget to get in contact at whatthehealthtech@radialhealthcare.com.